pronouns are he and him. I am a volunteer with the varsity project at Mount A. I'm also a member of the Mount Allison football team, as well as a second year sociology student at Mount Allison. I want to start off by saying Akwaba, a word in the Ghanaian culture known to welcome everyone, as well as welcome all the viewers and the panelists to this year's Black History Month panel discussion part two, hosted by the Varsity Project and Mass U community at Mount Allison. The panel today involves some amazing people who have some amazing stories and experiences to share, shed light to the Black Canadian community, and as well as help educate everyone else. I have been able to get to know some of the individuals over the past couple of weeks, or so can be more thankful for them to be. I also want to be more thankful for them being here and sharing their story with us, as well as giving us a little bit more, or actually educating all of us more about um, a lot of stuff we're about to learn today. And I would like to just start off by handing the mic over to everyone, the panelists, and let them introduce themselves. Coach Lee, if you would like to start.
Sure, thanks a lot, Dennis. I just put in the chat there. Are you Ghanaian?
Yes, I am part Ghanaian.
Hey, me too. Okay, let's go. Thank you, everyone. First of all, God bless everyone who's here today. I'm very fortunate to be in front of you. I am currently at St. FX University in my office. I'm the women's basketball coach here. And unfortunately, we didn't have a season this year, but other schools in our province did. So I'm a little salty about that. Um, but I'm here today to really share the stage with some amazing panelists. More specifically, I think I'm here to talk a little bit about the Black Canadian Coaches Association, which is an organization that is a not-for-profit that we incorporated back in June of 2020. And I'm a sport coach. I've been in basketball a really long time, but I think the intersection of kind of COVID's outbreak, as well as the racial injustices that were happening both here and in the US, really led a lot of coaches to start talking about what we need to do and how we can come together. And so, oddly enough, about 2 years ago, I started a little passion project of mine in honor of the original Black Coaches Association, which was started by the late great John Cheney and John Thompson in the States, in the U.S. And that it was really just a catalyst for like trying to find what resources are available for coaches as well as athletes. So fast forward 2 years later, we kind of get hit with, I think, that time frame that everyone is looking at, that June 2020, and that's really how the BCCA was born. So I can't take credit for its inception because it was started by phenomenal coaches years ago in the U.S. But there's a lot of amazing things that we've been able to get off the ground since June, and a lot of really great places we want to take it. So I'm looking forward to talk a little bit more about that. Husani?
Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm Husoni, and I am currently on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq in Fredericton, New Brunswick. I'm a recent graduate of St. Thomas University. And I guess a little bit about me. I'm from Jamaica. I moved here for university unexpectedly, and mainly because of St. Thomas's emphasis on social justice and social inclusion. And that's something that I was passionate about, even from being in Jamaica, being involved in grassroots advocacy groups, raising awareness about gender-based violence and police brutality in our community. And I think it's important that when we think about, anti-Black racism, a lot of times the experiences of Black people in predominantly Black countries are erased. But it's important to understand the global nature of anti-Black racism and the legacy and history of slavery and colonialism, and how that impacts the way in which Black communities live and survive, and just how those countries, like previous colonial countries, operate. So there's still a lot of kind of colonial and anti-Black violence that happens, and white supremacy even in predominantly Black countries. But anyways, fast forward to coming to St. Thomas, and I realized that there was a gap on campus when it relates to, you know, Black history and awareness around racism and racial injustice, because there is this facade that, you know, because we're situated next to the United States, it's always, we're not as bad, so there's nothing wrong here. You know, you should just leave if you're finding a problem. And there was no celebration of Black History Month events, and that's something that I thought was a problem. So I decided to take the initiative to plan events and rally support throughout the university to put on Black History Month events throughout my time there, and advocacy in other ways. And then I graduated in the midst of this pandemic. I don't even know if I can classify it as a graduation because there was no ceremony. I just received my diploma in the mail. One day I was a university student, and then another day the campus was closed down, and I just had assignments to finish, and then I guess my degree arrived in the mail. And at that time, there was a lot of awareness, I think, because a lot of people were stuck at home. So it was really hard to ignore the injustices people were seeing on social media. And it caused this rallying cry to address anti-Black racism, not only in the United States, but across North America and the world. And that's how, you know, after being involved in a protest here in Fredericton, we were just talking with community members, and there were a lot of things and issues that came up that were being erased. So we just decided that, you know, what are we going to do about it? You know, it's one thing to talk about it and say this is a problem, but the government isn't willing to address it directly, and institutions aren't willing to address it directly. So we had to come up with our own plans, our own advocacy, our own strategies to address anti-Black racism within our communities. And that's how we decided to start Black Lives Matter Fredericton. And yeah, we released some priorities to the government, including incorporating Black history in the public school curriculum, the government, urging the government to develop an anti-racism strategy here in New Brunswick, urging the government to do research on racism, because that's one of the major things, is that the experiences of Black people are erased here because there's no collection of this data. You know, in Toronto and bigger cities where they collect it, it's easy to show, you know, the disproportionate impacts of racism on marginalized groups, but here it's just not collected. So it's just dismissed as being, you know, in our heads. Anyways, I won't ramble on for too long, but that's just some of the things that we've been working on provincial scale and on the municipal level, working towards defunding the police and reimagining community safety in a way that actually invests in people and addresses the root cause of crime, and working to get more representation on the city council, because we'll be having our election coming up. So I won't take up too much more time talking about that, but hopefully we can get into some of those points during the conversation. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all the brilliant panelists here today.
Hi, I'm Noah. I studied political science and social Mount Allison University. I'm currently in Vancouver, where I was raised. A bit out of my way, Mount Allison, but I originally went to play football, and wasn't originally thinking about advocacy when I went. I was 17 and just really thinking about a raw, thinking about getting a degree, thinking about class mobility, those things. And I remember seeing the gap in places like study hall, in places like with my teammates, seeing the academic gap between Black student athletes and my Black peers and the larger white community around us. And I think that those experiences and the culmination of just the whiteness of what residence and the resident space was and public spaces at Mount Allison University, I think drove me towards advocacy. For myself, for the most part, I consider myself a writer, and I think advocacy for me is about telling honest stories, and projecting Black experiences, that are not simply just defined by the word Black, are not just um, racialized entirely. I feel like we do a lot of, we self, like we make our, or other people might make ourselves a monolith, and I like to, at least in my writing, diversify our conceptions, at least my conceptions, and contest what I think Blackness means to myself, to my family, to my history, and to the people around me. And I think what I really loved about Mount A's Black community was how it had so many different segments of the diaspora. Um, you can meet your Caribbean students, you can meet your African Canadians and your African Americans, like all in the same place. Um, and I found that to be uh, enriching because you learn so many different forms of Blackness and different models of Blackness. Yeah, and that's what I take with me in my advocacy. So I won't go on too long. I'm excited for this conversation, and thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
I would like to say again, thank you for all the panelists that showed up today, for taking time out of your schedule to, help educate myself and the other viewers, and as well as tell your own story about how you become an advocate in your own community. So I would like to start off with the first question. And basically, you are all advocates in some way in your own community. What or who has inspired you to take this role? Hassani or Coach Lee, anyone can go ahead.
Sure, I could start off. So I think for me, being a Black female that is a first generation and also grew up in a West African household, I always found myself just to be like the odd man out. Like I was a tomboy, usually running around with all the guys. I grew up in the hood. And so I just always saw myself as unique, and there was always some form of adversity. And I find that in my transition from an athlete to a coach, I started to think a little bit more critically as to how I can stand up for other people who are like me, whether it's women, whether women in sport in particular, whether it's Black people. I think in a selfish way, a lot that I've seen through my time in sport as a high performance athlete, and playing at the Division I level, playing at the JUCO level, and then playing at the U Sport level. It's from my experience, I've been able to take away a lot, and I'm also passionate about academics, and so I did a Master's of Arts in History, and so I'm really keen on research. And to Husoni's point, it's like what is out there. And a few years ago, when I took this job at St. FX, which I absolutely love, by the way, I get to teach here in our human kinetic department, and then I have some awesome young women that I get to coach. I knew I was coming to rebuild a program, but I wasn't expecting the challenges that came with the intersectionality of being the first female to be a varsity head coach in the institution's history since 1858, and being the only female Black head coach really in this kind of space. And I kind of came in really naive in terms of that. Now, did I experience various forms of racial discrimination or things that had stood out? Yes, like growing up, I didn't see a lot of representation, but it was so normalized that I actually didn't see that as something that was wrong. Like it just was a norm. So when I met, the first Black police officer, who also happened to be one of my coaches, like it was a huge deal, but it wasn't like, oh my goodness, we're oppressed, we need more of you. I think certainly when I made the jump to being a coach, I started coaching full time 4 years ago. I was coaching at the prep level. I was a dorm live-in parent with my athletes, and then we were at a private facility. I just started to think, okay, with more responsibility comes more accountability. And how can I be a better coach? How can I be a better woman of faith? How could I be a better daughter? And a lot of that really has just inspired me to try to get things off the ground in whatever capacity. And I'm really fortunate that I've been able to have some mentors around me to assist in that. I really also loved Husoni's point about how important it is to collect race-based data. The BCCA, back in June, one of our first calls to action was for every member institution at the U Sport level and the CCAA level to conduct race-based studies. And so we're partnered with the University of Toronto and the Ideas Lab to launch what we've called the Racial Equity Project. And what's been interesting are the institutions that have quite literally bought into the project and those institutions that have not. And so that's, it goes right back to an evidence-informed approach in terms of understanding where the gaps are and how we can address it. But then it's also about validating those experiences. When everyone had the Black screen that they posted on their social medias for standing in solidarity, there were a lot of alumni who spoke out. And actually that was a catalyst in many cases for getting things going. And so I think validating experiences is important. Having an evidence-informed approach is important. Some things we don't really need evidence. We don't need, a year-long study to do. Like we know there's, for instance, 0 Black athletic directors at our U Sport level. But again, it does lend itself to one way that we've been behind, which is in collecting race-based data and then being able to put forth some recommendations and guidelines for some of those.
Would you like to go next, Noah?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. To answer the question, who has inspired me? I'd say first and foremost, my family. I was raised in a Congolese Christian household, and I feel like solidarity is like the foundational practice, and to carry that with you wherever you go. That brought me to advocacy, just generally, more specific to at Mount A. I'd say advocacy was necessitated by study hall. So I was a first year playing football, and I hadn't necessarily realized that I was well suited to succeed in the university, at the university level, despite where I was coming from, and despite the neighborhood I grew up in. And I was playing with a lot of my with teammates who in study hall needed help that could not or would not be given by the school, or the students did not have a connection to the outer campus in a way that would bring one to the resources that the school had for academic excellence. So I found myself in study hall, I'm 17, like tutoring my peers, and doing my best to help close a gap that I couldn't possibly close. And then I remember realizing, like, this is widespread. This can't be just a few guys on my team. This is a widespread issue. That led me to research. And it was the idea that you could play 5, 6 years, 4 years for the team, or you could play 2 years, have an insane injury, and end your career and then drop out of college and not continue your education, which I saw so many Black men do. That really brought me to, okay, this is a problem and somebody needs to speak about. And yeah, I feel like, yeah, and specific people, I would say Black veterans that were on the football team, guys that taught me the position, guys that showed me a model of Blackness in Sackville, which is a contested thing. Like, being Black in Sackville meant, oh, somebody sees you. To be white in Sackville, somebody might have to ask you a question before they know you're not from there. You stick out a lot. And I remember understanding how Black men operate in public spaces, how we took space or how we completely left it open to them. We never entered certain spaces that were too, like, steeped in the establishment. And there's a sort of segregation in both ways, where you understand, okay, if I make my community, it's going to be separate in some way from the outer student community. But the outer student community isn't ever going to have a conversation or go to the football table to have a conversation. So I have to build those bridges, things like that. And that's the things that BIPOC have always had to do: build the bridges first, understand the situation. So I would say, yeah, Black veterans on the team brought me to advocacy. Black students that showed me different models in classroom, what that looked like. That helped me with my writing, that helped me with my critical thinking. The BSU executive when I was in my first year, that showed me the ropes, what organizing looks like, and specifically what creating safe Black spaces looks like. I think those people really, just by way of like taking the time, like it's a Tuesday, you finish your classes, those little moments, those little human moments, I think more than anything, more than watching a Martin Luther King speech, brought me to advocacy, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I share a lot of similarities with what was already said. And when I think about, deeply about the foundations of my advocacy, because I don't really like to give myself any terms, but I think fundamentally it comes from a place of empathy. It's just that I'm generally a very like caring person. Like I'm empathetic to, everyone. Like I can understand the situations other people are in. And also just being a critical thinker myself, and my passion for people, my passion for community, and just thinking about all the problems of the world, like so many things that need to be addressed. And just knowing that I need to play a role in that change, because we have a lot of people who are willing to acknowledge the problem or talk about the problem, but not a lot of people who are willing to say, okay, what am I going to do about it? And I feel like if everyone, not everyone's not going to change the world by themselves, but if everyone, saw a problem and wanted to do whatever they could, their small contribution,
I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties with Hassani's mic. Hassani, can you just repeat what you just said, where you just cut up for a minute?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I guess I don't know where I cut out, but it's just like seeing what needs to be done. If I think about that there's a problem, I see there's a problem, then just thinking about what I can do, how I can organize, how I can mobilize community to address it, and doing my part. And honestly, I don't see it as me being, a change maker in any way. It's just me seeing a problem and be like, okay, this is something that I have the means to address and I can do, and I'm going to do my best to contribute to it and support the work of other Black people. And I think that's something that also kind of inspires me, because we need to understand that the movement for Black Lives to Matter and Black liberation, it didn't start over the summer. It didn't start 4 years ago. This is a centuries-old movement for Black liberation from when Black people were seen as just property. So when I look back, and just the fact that I'm here despite the atrocities that have been inflicted on my ancestors, through the slave trade, but also through the erasure of our identities as people who've been, as someone from Jamaica, being colonized. And then even my recent ancestors, my grandfather, who was a Rastafarian, and it might come as a surprise right now, because Rastafarianism, wearing dreads and all of that is kind of popular right now through Bob Marley and stuff. But back in the day, like, you could go to prison, you could be persecuted, you were discriminated against. And just knowing that he held on to his faith, what he believed in, and still persevered to pass on. Like, I wouldn't consider myself a Rastafarian, but I did grow up around him, and he did teach me a lot of things. So just recognizing the resilience of Black people and their grit and determination to stand up for justice, stand up for what is right, stand up against injustices. Even the founders, the Black women that founded the Black Lives Matter movement, Black women, Black men, Black queer people who are organizing all across North America, all across the world, to create a space where Black people are liberated and have equal access to opportunity. That resilience inspires me to do my small part in making a large impact. And I just briefly like to touch on that when I say liberation for all Black people. I think what draws me specifically to kind of grassroots advocacy is that, you know, I don't just want liberation for a few Black people. You know, that's a limitation to kind of more of the corporate structure to Black liberation. It only liberates some people to, you know, I think representation is important, you know, getting some people, but that's just a few people getting these positions. But when we think about the broader systems that oppress Black people as a result of, you know, capitalism and how Black people have been and continue to be exploited, and, you know, all the other ways that continue to marginalize and exclude Black people, that's where my kind of thought process is that we just don't want representation in oppressive systems. We want to create a new world or a new system that doesn't oppress anyone, you know, like it's not just me getting a position of authority or becoming like I was the first Black president of the student union, like that was good. But, you know, what can we do to make sure that all Black students have access to education and all these things? So yeah, it's just I tend to ramble a lot, but in conclusion, it's a passion for community, the inspiration that I draw from all the other people who are organizing and I can learn from and count on, and my empathy and wanting to create a world where everyone is liberated and have freedom to self-determination.
Thank you for you guys answering that question and sharing your stories with us. The second question, it's mainly about leadership. As you guys are all leaders, with Coach Lee being the founder of the BCCA and Noah being the founder of the Black History Month movement in Fredericton, and no, my bad, I apologize. Noah winning the IPAC award and Hassani being the founder of the Black History Month movement in Fredericton. What advice or even knowledge would you guys share with people that want to make a change in the community, want to be a leader, want to stand up for what they believe is right?
Actually, I just talked a while ago, so I'll give someone else the opportunity to start.
I'd say primarily stay humble. It's easy to take too much on all at once, especially in those like first steps of like politicization into a specific movement or a certain issue. And I think to stay humble as to what you are capable of, and then also look for resources and look for help. You're a single person, make sure that you are aware that regardless of where you are, whether you're in Sackville, you're in Toronto, you're in Montreal, you're in a rural city in Manitoba, like there's a community somewhere, search it out. And if you can't find it, start building the foundation of it. But I would say stay humble, stay resilient. I feel like the fear of failure often keeps people from starting things or following things they believe are true. And I feel for me, it was about, like, say I'm in a classroom, being honest to myself was about, say consensus are doing something that I genuinely believe is like a system of racism that's centuries old. And it has now consensus in this political science room. My honesty says contest it. And that might not be huge, but at the end of the day, whatever other person of minority in that classroom, like if that helps them okay, I didn't agree with that white mass behind me saying these things, if that gives them a space to contest and build their own communities, or feel comfortable in their space, or in their feelings of dissent, or in their transgression against white colonial spaces, then I think that's good. And I think being aware that comfortability of the public is good for some, and comfortability in all segments of society is a pacifying tool. So if we're all always comfortable, we're only really talking about, well, if we're all comfortable, we're really only talking about a specific segment of people who have hegemony over the norms, and those people get to operate in safe spaces and truly be safe. I operate in all these norms. I enter this classroom, I enter this public space, I enter this academic space, and it's going to cater to me. I'm extremely safe. So when I'm listening to a history prof who says the end, I don't feel terribly offended. Say you're a white student. And that's happened at Mount A, where a white professor said the N-word in a history class, and the majority of white students didn't stage a walkout. They didn't throw their hands up in the air. They weren't outraged the way Black students and Black leaders at Mount A heard of it. They were like, "How is nothing being done about this?" And I find that you have to be ready to contest consensus and what the majority has said is the truth or is okay, because that has killed us before. So why are we? Do you know what I mean? Being true to a truth that is lethal. Anyways.
I guess I would definitely agree with you know, a lot of the things that Noah mentioned there around, you know, humility, and you know, it comes back to kind of what I said, that kind of at the beginning, which relation to, you know, doing your part and knowing your capacity and what you can do to make an impact. You know, like one man can, or one woman or one person can't change the world, but if we all, you know, did what we have the capacity to do, and what we saw was wrong, if we all did a small part in contributing to that, then there would be change. So I say is what I'd say is do your part in that sense, like whatever spaces you're in, you know, think critically about, you know, what you can do to make an impact on that, and change whatever change you can make. And I think the point about, you know, connecting with community, if you're, you know, a white person and you're looking to be an ally, you know, connect with the community to see how they want to be supported, what they'd like from you, rather than, you know, being like, okay, I'm going to be a Black Lives Matter advocate, and this is what I think is best for the Black community. So this is what I'm going to go and advocate for. So I think even as a Black person as well, like, you know, I don't know all the answers to Black liberation, and I don't know what every Black person wants. And my experience as a Black immigrant coming here and getting a university degree is different from, you know, a Black person that grew up here in a low-income household, and it's different from a Black person that is affluent. So all these experiences are different. So I think it's always important to, as best as possible, trying to understand and connect with communities to develop that comprehensive understanding and seeing what your role is or what you can do. And then I guess two last things would be having a thick skin. I feel like that's a lesson that I had to learn throughout my time in student leadership, because not everyone will agree with your position, especially when you're challenging, you know, what's the norm, or as Noah put it, the consensus. You know, what if you're challenging that, you will face backlash. In my first year, when I said, you know, there's no Black History Month events, like there's a lack of education around Black history, and there's racism in New Brunswick, that got picked up by CBC. And then I saw the comments like, why don't you go back home? Like, you're just making trouble here. Like, you're making, even now with the Black Lives Matter movement, when we launched a bursaries for Black students, you know, people sent us emails saying, you're just perpetuating racism. You're being racist against white people. Or when we commissioned through my job at the Multicultural Council, research on racism, they were like, why are you just promoting racism? You know, like, stop talking about it, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll receive these criticisms, but just focus on what fuels you and what drives you. For me, it's the passion for community and knowing that my intentions are in the right place, and not shunning out criticism, but being able to assess it, listen, assess it, and then determine whether or not, if it's valid, then you can, you know, learn from it and move on. And if it's not valid, then being able to say, okay, this is totally not valid, so I won't give it the credit or attention or emotional energy that it's requiring or it's seeking of me. So I think that continuing to learn and grow, and knowing that, you know, you're never gonna always have the right answers. Maybe what I'm advocating right now for in 10 years, when there's a revelation and there's new information available, I might be able to, I might have to say, you know, have the humility to say, okay, what I thought back then, I had the right intentions here, and I know why I was doing it, but I can revisit that. And I think that's important, especially when it comes on to allies, knowing that you won't, you know, have it perfect all the time, and you are going to make mistakes, and, you know, different folks will have different opinions on stuff, but just being able to grow and learn, and appreciate that that's just a part of the process of change, then you're on the right track. So I'm not sure if those made much sense, but that's just my initial thoughts on that.
Just to build on Noah and Husani's great points there, I got a few tips and nuggets, I guess, for advice that certainly nobody is required to take, but I just figure I'd share them. So I think the first is, like, what was important for me when I wanted to advocate in this space where I didn't have an education that was specific to anti-Black racism, anti-oppressive frameworks, is understanding deference. And so simply in a form of humility, going to people who do this work and who have some formalized experience in this space, that was kind of important for me. In recognizing that for a long time, I've been someone who really has been, you know, in a specific sports space, and really have a lot of biases that are just relative to being a Black female in basketball. And so, like, one of the first things that I did, and intentionally trying to start something in the space that I occupy, was going to academic professors. And so some of our leading sport historians, sport sociologists, anti-racism experts, and saying, hey, like, what's available in this space? Like, what has been published the last 10, 15, 20 years? And even just that process was really eye-opening. And I think when I take a step back and look at our sport community, and right now I'm going to speak specifically to basketball. I grew up in the Greater Toronto area, and there are a lot of small businesses and sport business owners, and we always seem to reinvent the wheel. And so I think, like, my first piece of advice would be, like, understand deference, get the right people to the table. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I say it to my athletes I coach all the time. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing you're going to hear is no. You have to be okay with hearing no. But getting the right people to be part of it is important, and humbly asking for their time, and hopefully being able to compensate them in whatever form for their time, or in the intersections where it works. With the BCCA, we have a few committees that we've started centered on this notion of getting the right people, and constantly striving to find more people who are aligned with our mission of seeing racial equity throughout our Canadian sports landscape. And so part of that has been a Black Holistic Health Committee. Part of that has been an anti-racism experts committee. And so that's just been really exciting, is learning through this process of doing and through this process of action. I also believe that because there is a lack of diversity in leadership positions in our sport community, we had a lot of well-intentioned people who are not of color trying to now make decisions. And again, it comes back to why, like, probably shouldn't make decisions for people who aren't at the table that can provide that input and that insight, because it's like a recipe for disaster, like you might get away with it, but most of the time you don't. And that's kind of what we found in a lot of our discourses with coaches in particular, but then also athletes. And so we had really well-intentioned, like, white coaches that were like, let's have this conversation. I'm ready to stand up and, like, I want to help. But then it just went sideways because you re-triggered something that you didn't mean to, or you came in and didn't understand the language and didn't have the education. And so I think it does require a lot of intentional planning. You just can't throw on a DNI hat, EDNI hat, and that leads to my second point, is educating yourself as much as possible. And that is a very loose, I'm using that term loosely. And that's everything from picking up that Desmond Cole book to Googling stuff, to asking the athletes that you coach, or asking people that you work with and your colleagues and your peers. There's so many ways of educating yourself. Podcasts, there's tons of resources out there. What I find fairly interesting is, like, I'm always trying to educate myself on my own culture. And now in the intersection of racial advocacy, I'm like, holy smokes, like when St. FX was built, and many of our university institutions were colonial institutions, that was the same time that Yaa Asantewaa was leading battles of our Ghanaian community groups against British invaders. Like those things happen at the same time in different parts of the country. Like, holy smokes. Like, to me, that's like, I just love educating myself, because now I've got this kind of like, here comes the historian out of me, but you know what I mean? You're just like, this is crazy. And now, here we are hundreds of years later, and I'm across the world in a different place than my ancestors were. And we're having this, it's the same battle, but it's in 2021, right? So it's just crazy. I think there's so many things that you can learn. And I've loved how our sport community, and it's not just our sport community, because I've taken inspiration from the West Halls, who are being really intentional about combating anti-Black racism in the corporate space, from the Dennis Mitchells, who are working with the Canadian and provincial governments through the Black Opportunity Fund. It's incredible. Sport Canada in 2019 launched Building a Foundation for Change, Canada's anti-racism strategy. So this was 2019, a year before really our whole community started having these conversations. So I think we're at an incredible moment in time, but I think there's so much out there that can really help us contextualize where we are, and then imagine the ways that we can decolonize the spaces that we occupy. My last piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to ask questions. And sometimes when you're asking questions, it comes off like I guess how you're asking them is important, but like, don't think, well, this might come off the wrong way. Like, it's better to ask those questions. It's better to allude to things, because it's always better, in my opinion, it's always better to be less ambiguous and then not really take a stand than to take a stand. So, like, being anti-racist means you are taking a stance. And so it means you're thinking critically. And as a coach, for example, like, I tell the players that I recruit and the players that I have, look, you have to be ready to take critical information or constructive criticism, however you want to call it, because when you can specify certain things that you need to improve on, certain things that you need to address, certain gaps that are, now you can start to think and look around at how we can answer those questions. So don't be afraid to ask questions. As a young coach, certainly at the youth sport level, one of my biggest challenges was like calling things out and questioning things. And I was like, okay, maybe because I'm like an outsider, so I'm not an ex-grad, or, I'm not originally from Nova Scotia, and plus I'm a female, plus I'm young, so maybe that's why. And I just feel like I've been empowered with a new sense of boldness that has made me worry more about my values and who I am and my character more than I am about my job. And so I am like, I'm in my third year now as a coach, and I'm like we need to think about this critically. We need to ask these questions, and we need to try our best to answer them, instead of like, I don't want to say the wrong thing because this is how it might make me look. I'm more comfortable with saying I was wrong about something and being educated in that process than not saying it at all, especially as it pertains to standing up for the athletes that I serve, standing up for myself, standing up for other people that look like me.
Thank you for the piece of advice that everyone's given us, and I'm pretty sure we've all comprehended it. And I've taken a lot of notes actually, and I'm really amped up to be a leader. But the second question is basically, has there been any moment as a leader you felt like there was more you could have done, and if so, how did you go about handling the situation? Noah, if you would like to start.
Yeah, okay. I'd say there are definitely so many moments where as a leader I could have done more. But I think it's about limiting that voice a bit. The voice that says you can do more. Like you can do more and be stern and resilient and continue working, but don't burn out seeking something that is unattainable by yourself. So for myself, I think where I could have done more was being more intentional, building bridges between um, the Black community at Mount A, Black students, so on and so forth. Building bridges inside of it. So by that I mean with the Caribbean Students Association, with the Black Students Union, with other Black groups, and with other groups of BIPOC. I think being more intentional, working with other groups, I think I would have definitely done, um, and being more intentional in um, placement of time, uh, understanding like we have a finite resource and we need to get to work. Uh, Sense of urgency, I think, most certainly. Something that I wish I would have handled better in certain situations, but like you're overwhelmed with your midterms and all these different things, so you're always juggling something. So I think it's always good to like I always made sure I had like a notebook on me, and in that notebook I had my priorities, and in that notebook I had notes on classes, poetry to get my mind off of classes, so on and so forth. And I found that that was a good tool for myself, at least, when I was thinking about, okay, Black History Month is coming up in a month. I have midterms coming up in a month. I have all these things coming up in a month. Okay, how do I scale my time? What is going to go first? And then also, multitasking is a lie. Like, do one task, do it efficiently. Switch tasks, do that efficiently. Switch tasks. But don't do this thing where you're like, yeah, like I can just half my screen, just like no, like just be efficient with your time and know that it's finite, and know that if you're choosing to be a student leader or a leader in your work position or so on and so forth, that it's going to take time out of you and energy out of you. But at the end of the day, you reap what you sow, and I don't really regret anything that I gave to the Mount A community, especially not time or energy. Yeah.
Coach Lee, would you like to go since you will have to leave soon?
Sure. I was just thinking to myself, what's one moment that I experienced that I wish I could have done more? That is the question, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I recruited a young woman who's a first generation Caribbean descent, families from Jamaica. And growing up in Ontario and having the issue of academic streamlining, she was assessed with a learning disability, but without formalized tools, as you would say. So pretty much because it just kind of seemed like something was off, she had a learning disability. That's literally how it was worded. And so from like the fourth grade onwards, she needed supports. And I was able to coach her and train with her and stuff and meet her family. And she actually was a member of my first recruiting class. And when she came, we knew that she would need those extra supports. So we have like an accessible learning center on campus. And what does that get you access to? Well, extra note takers, maybe if there's an alternative style of testing, you additional time for testing, just different things like that. And I'm making the jump from high school to university. Well, here at St. FX, you need a formalized assessment, and it needs to be within like within the last 4 or 5 years. And so there's a challenge there because it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to actually have a LD done. So there's a lot of things about that process. I mean, going back to even how she was diagnosed and what that meant for her confidence, what that meant for her parents, and having to understand that and trusting teachers. So the academic streamlining is the issue. What I wish I could have done more was fight in terms of making sure my administration knew that if we're bringing someone here and we're asking for 110% on the court, we are setting them up for failure if we cannot support them academically. And it probably was one of the things that I really, I mean, I'm sort of still in that battle, but I just feel like in the moment I should have really amplified how much of a concern it is, because this could be football players, this could be soccer players, this could be rugby players, but it's a gap. And when I approached our accessible learning center and I said, hey, like what supports are available for a family that doesn't have $5,000 to get an assessment in a month, you know what I mean, to get some support. It was like, oh, we got the DeVoe fund, maybe she could check that out. And I was like, the DeVoe fund is for African Nova Scotians. This young woman is not African Nova Scotian. So what do we, and that's number one. Number two, that is not a reward that's given by our institution. That's the DeVoe family that is stepping up and wanting to see better for African Nova Scotians, and thank goodness. So, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, what do we do? What can we say that we do? And so that's kind of, I keep that experience with me, because again, if I am going to be a leader in the space, I have to be willing to go to the ends to challenge that. And I think part of it was being a young coach, you're also trying to understand what is available out there and what's not. But that's one specific example of when I wish I would have fought more to say, like, ASAP, we need to figure this out. And so we're having some of those conversations now. I think institutions need to do much better. I think it goes back to the issue of academic streamlining, but in the space that we occupy, again, how can we be better? So like, number one, there are more Black people than just African Nova Scotians. Like, that was something specific. I was just like, guys, like, you know what I mean? Like, let's not feign this ignorance, and let's understand that, like, Black culture is so multifaceted, right? And so if we are going to try to solve issues, we need to, again, it goes back to the education piece. So that's kind of my one example.
Thank you for sharing, Hassani.
Yeah, thanks, Coach Lee and Noah, for your thoughtful answers. I guess for me, there's always a pressure of not doing enough or not being good enough, and I'm not sure how much of that stems from just growing up with in a society where Blackness is often undervalued, and you have to constantly try to prove yourself. And then, specifically to being a leader here in the Canadian context, being the first Black president of the student union, I felt a lot of pressure as to, you know, representing your entire race, which is obviously like impossible. Like, I don't know all the opinions and positions of all Black people, but just the standard in which I felt I wanted to hold myself to, because I did not want to disappoint anyone. And I knew that their stereotypes are so prevalent that if I made a mistake in any way or didn't do enough, then, you know, that would be reflective of, you know, oh, a Black person should never be president because of this or whatever. Those are just fears and things that popped up in my head. And also being Jamaican and growing up in the Caribbean, like a lot of Black families like put a lot of pressure on their kids as well. So I just always have this kind of pressure of not being not doing enough. And I think any leader, probably all leaders might have that as well. But specific examples, I think that there's so many examples that I could point to that I constantly question, you know, did I do enough? Like right now, international students pay double the tuition of domestic students. Like I was an international student and I still consider like, you know, like what could I have done better? Like I know I talked about this and accessible education for all students. Like I talked about that in Board of Governors meetings. I sent the letters, I mobilized campaigns to government. Like I did all of that, but it's still not happening. You know, people still are facing barriers. So I definitely, that's just one example, but, you know, having more diversity on the student union, like all of these were things that I wanted to get done, but that weren't able to be actualized. And at some part of that, yeah, I do feel that I needed, or I could have, or should have gotten more done. But I think it comes down to being content with what you were able to do and knowing that you did your best. And I feel like at the end of my term in student leadership, I really got to recognize that was that, you know, I tend to focus on what I wasn't able to do. But right now I'm thinking, you know, look at the things that I was able to accomplish with the help of my team and all the support systems that I was able to have. So, and also just knowing that I did my best. I did the best that I could in that moment, and just being content with that. You know, as I said, we can't all, you know, like I come to think back, it's impossible of me to think that me as a student leader coming in and then I make like international students not pay tuition and everyone have, you know, like myself alone, like that decision was in the university administration, the government. Like I did my best to mobilize and push for that change, but if it didn't happen, like I can't blame myself for that. So I just know, just knowing that I did the best that I could, and I was in it for the right reason, and I did push it forward. And yeah, and just being content with what I was able to do with the help of everyone around me. And I think that's the answer. It's just doing your best and being content with that, and also learning, being open to learning from whatever mistakes that I probably made that prevented me from doing more. So if I'm presented with that opportunity again in the future, I'm able to use that knowledge to make that impact. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you for sharing. An attendee has a question for you guys. I believe Coach Lee is in the process of answering the question right now, but I'm just going to repeat a question out there for you guys to hear. So basically the question is, what does each panelist do for self-care despite doing demanding work for their community? Coach Lee, if you just want to give like a brief, you know, talk about what you just typed out.
Sure, absolutely. And before I forget, I did want to say thank you again for MASU, I guess that's how you pronounce it, Mani Student Union, for bringing me through. So the question was, how do I practice self-care? So for me, it's just been through growing my faith through the Lord. Like I just have been way more at peace in my journey of being a follower. And so specifically carving out time for myself, usually first thing I do when I wake up is some form of Bible study or praying. And it just has started my days off really well and has helped me manage a lot. And then the second is staying physically active. So it's been a while since I've really went hard with working out. Like I used to be super crazy about working out, but just being on the court, I do a bunch of individuals throughout the day. I do some community work. So staying physically active, I think, just gets me in that right mind frame. Thank you, guys.
Hassani or Noah, whoever wants to go.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for having me again. So I think for me, it's just knowing one thing. This would tie back into the last question, but just knowing my capacity, like a lot of the things is me stressing myself out with, either taking on too much or, the fear of disappointing everyone else. So I say yes to everything. And then I end up like dedicating my weekends and like every waking hour to meeting all these commitments and all these expectations. So one radical form of self-care is not saying that like I will still do my best and give my best to each situation, but sometimes being able to say, you know what, I'd love to, but I don't think I'll have the capacity at this time, and then using that time to find something that you enjoy doing and that brings you piece, and kind of disconnecting, not that you're like a separate person from your work or whatever you're involved in, but sometimes like being able to shut that off and be like, okay, let's focus on something else. And I really didn't have any hobbies really, but just trying to find out what I'd be interested in doing in my spare time. Now I go for walks sometimes, watching something on Netflix, etc. So just figuring out, something that you enjoy doing and finding yourself outside of what you're passionate about and what you do for work, and using that to kind of fuel you in a sense. And I think I'm not sure if this is related, but kind of using your passion to drive you in a sense, because a lot of times it can become demotivating, doing whatever work you're doing. And something for me is just, reminding myself of why I'm in it, what I'm doing, and maybe putting that up somewhere that can kind of help to push you forward. But yeah, my most important thing would just be learning the art of saying no sometimes. Maybe you'll go back to that person and say, okay, yeah, I did have the capacity, like in 2 weeks I will, or something. And being true to yourself and your commitments in that way, I think would be the best start to practicing self-care.
Awesome. For me personally, I would say I feel like I practice self-care through poetry and through essay writing, and through rap. And I feel like those each carry distinct voices, and they get out different things that I hold. And I think that's always been really interesting to me, how the polemic can just be articulate rant, but the essay can be a formulated argument. You can just boast on a rap track, and then you can lay your trauma bare in a poem. Just understanding variations of mediums and different voices, I think, has always been good for me in self-care. Understanding myself, and for that, I feel like it's community. So grounding myself in community, having conversations with my mom about the world she carries. Yeah, like digging into the histories of my family, digging into the things that I've been displaced from. Yeah, just like, yeah, the like creating a cultural memory that I've been displaced from, I feel like is an act of self-care. Also, yeah, like writing as a therapeutic act, and as an act of memory, to put it down, to put the memory down. Not necessarily to publish, like say you want to, but writing as a tool to, like maybe not journaling, but writing as a tool to carry with you throughout the day. Besides that, 2K, you gotta jump on the PS4 sometimes. Gotta do some 2K. Yeah, Dennis is nodding his head. Yeah, yeah, things like that. Take time, bounce. That like just definitely saying no to people. Sometimes for me, that's saying no to people and then jumping on 2K. Maybe that's saying no to people and writing a poem. I found that during my time at Mani as a student, while I was a student leader, doing BSU and I was doing my classes and all these things, self-care was very much saying, I'm not going out like for this semester. I'm like, when people are going to be drunk at Ducky's, I'm going to be writing an essay for myself, just to work on my craft or to better understand what I wanted from myself. And yeah, just keeping myself on track and understanding my priorities, my responsibilities, so on and so forth. But yeah, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that piece of advice about self-care. And another question by an attendee was, what's your method of getting out of the freeze mindset, burnout? And when like when you've taken on too much, like such as getting stuck in like you're mentally and physically stuck and you feel like you're gonna shut down, how would you guys get yourself out of that mindset?
Yeah, I say, the first thing is preventing that from happening in the first place. So, mentioning before about, being able to say no, recognizing your capacity, which is so hard to do, it's hard to say no sometimes, but just learning that skill and being honest with yourself, because sometimes we're too ambitious with with what we want to accomplish and our capacity, and we're not really honest. In our minds, we're like, yeah, we can do all of this, but we're not really honest with ourselves of what we have the capacity to do at that time, in place. But if you do, I found myself in that situation a lot of times too, where I was like, oh my gosh, like I said yes to all of these things, but now all of them are combined, like my schoolwork plus like my job as a student union plus my job outside of the student union, and all of these are just coming together. But I think what I do is first, I try to ground myself. Sometimes your thoughts you'll get away in your thoughts and be like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail all of this is all gonna crumble, and then just going into that spiral won't really help the situation, and it won't help you get whatever you need to get done. So grounding yourself, and then first of all, rationalizing your thoughts, speaking with someone else to rationalize those for you, get another input on it. If you failed it, if you don't submit this paper on time, your professor is going to fail you, you're going to drop out of university, then you're going to end up on the streets, your parents are going to disown you. Like sometimes our thoughts really do get ahead of us. So articulating that with someone else and kind of rationalizing it, and saying, or doing it for yourself and saying, actually no, like I won't drop out of university if I don't do this. Like I can just ask my professor for an extension. The worst that can happen is they say no, hopefully they're empathetic, whatever. So I think that would be the first point. Don't get yourself into kind of a dark hole of overthinking. Then the second step, and rationalizing your thoughts and what you need to get done. The second step for me would be organizing what you have to get done, these priorities. So for me, like I'm a very list person, like I write so many lists all the time. So as soon as I get something, or if like, I literally can't work unless I have a list of like knowing, what I need, because then I'm going to be like, I'm forgetting something or whatever. So my advice would be organizing those thoughts in a tangible way, like a list. And then you can either start with the smallest task, or And then when you get that done, you take a break, feel better, then start with something else that feels attainable, and then move your way up. Or you can start based on priorities. So what's most urgent? What do you need to get done first? And don't really think about the thing that you need to get done 5 weeks from now or 1 week from now. Just think about, okay, what is due tomorrow? Okay, that's all I need to focus on. And then doing that and then taking it step by step that way. And don't be afraid to reach out for help, and being honest with people. Accountability is really important to me. So being honest to other people that are depending on your work, if you made those commitments, as soon as possible, that you realize, I'm unable to fulfill them. Like, that happens sometimes, things happen. And if you honestly believe you're unable to do that, then reach out to the person and say, I found myself in this situation. I want to be honest with you. Here's what I could do, or I can no longer commit to this, whatever, and put yourself first in that situation. But as long as you give that ample notice and effective communication, hopefully those people will understand. And then once you're out of this kind of burnt out loophole or dark hole of work, then you can plan your schedule and your commitments in a way that it's more manageable in the future. So I know that was long, but that's just my thoughts on that.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Another attendee has a question, and basically, it's a really long question, but I'm gonna rephrase it and do my best to try and get the question across to you guys. So basically, what the attendee was saying is that he was approached by somebody online about how the kind of like it's defeating the purpose, the fact that a person fighting for equality is dating somebody outside their race. Like, it's an interracial couple, they're an interracial couple. So basically, him fighting for black black equality and just social justice, it was kind of like defeating the purpose just because he's dating someone outside his race. How would you guys go about approaching that, and what's your advice? Like, is that something that should be meant, like, even connected to educating people, or even talking about equality and Black Lives Matter, like the Black Lives Matter movement?
Read bell hooks for sure. Read bell hooks for sure. But also love who you love. I think the right response to that is that it's that argument. I feel like the question is like the person questioning that person's relationship is the counterproductive party in that situation. Just because, I mean, if you consider the civil rights movement, you consider the history of lynching, consider the history of, like, Black liberation has always been tied to female liberation, to the feminist movement has always been tied to that. And at the end of the day, whether or not white men have the ability to police the sexuality of women, and if they do have the, you know what I mean, so on and so forth, that's always been attached to those things. And I think when we think about interracial relationships, we have to see them in a historical scope. It's 2021. Now, if I believe that being pro-Black is about, like, being honest to myself, so on and so forth, all these things, that also means delving into things and staying out of boxes and labels that have been completely, the expectations from those labels. Like, if I'm trying to be an honest human being, it isn't to formulate all of my identities and all of my actions specifically through Blackness, what pro-Blackness means and what it means to other people, right? So that means in my private life, like, yes, and looks like you can read a million things about how Black women are more loyal to the race, and things like that. And I agree with how, especially in a place like Mount A, I feel like Black women are often made invisible because our community is already kind of invisible in the larger community, and Black men just kind of, yeah. Anyway, so I definitely understand the question and the uncomfortability with the question, but I feel like too many people have died for their love for someone to just be like, man, like that's counterproductive. Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of out of place. If that person's a true person, feels convicted in their passions and convicted in their relationship, like what? I'm not going to contest them. And like, I don't know, I'm not going to go up to like France Fanon, who had a child with a white woman, who loved the white woman, and be like, yo, you were wrong for that. Like, do you mean like I'm not going to go to, yeah, I'm not going to go to the black intellectuals and the black leaders that have had white partners and were wrong for that, Maya Angelou. Like, that's nonsense. And for me, I think we have to be more honest with what the human experience is than to put it into these boxes of like, yo, sorry, you're black. Like, oh, you're Bakongo. Like, marry a Bakongo woman. Like, yo, that's not how simple things are. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, my perspective on this question would be simply that the movement for Black Lives to Matter includes the right for Black people to have self-determination and write their own path and, you know, do what makes them happy. So I think anything that's, you know, opposed to that is kind of promoting the same system of, you know, white supremacy and anti-Blackness, like telling Black people how to live and what they should do, you know. So it was racism when, you know, it was prohibited for Black people to be married to white people, etc., and Black people, prohibiting Black people from doing certain things, buying houses in certain places, attending certain churches, etc. And I feel like it's still some kind of anti-Blackness or opposition, I'd say, to Black liberation, to be telling people, you know, Black people how they should live their lives and what makes them happy. So if a Black man or a Black woman choose to date outside of their way, that's a liberatory act. That's, you know, liberation to them and the right for them to determine what they want their love life to look like, right? So I think that policing Black love and who Black people choose to love is a form of I characterize it as kind of anti-Black liberation. Because I think at the core of Black Lives Matter movement, it's or Black liberation is the right to self-determination, you know, the right for a Black person to be able to walk down the street without being policed or carded or get shot because they're Black. It's the right for a Black person to go and work at certain places, you know, wear their natural hair in a state that they feel is acceptable, etc. So kind of policing them in the reverse, saying, oh, you should only date in your race, is kind of counterproductive to the movement. It should be, yeah, I'll just be repeating this, but at the core of it, the movement is for self-determination and Black people to have the opportunity to do what makes them feel fulfilled and what makes them happy. So I feel like a Black person choosing to love or date someone outside of their race or whatever ways in which Black love manifests itself, I think that that's a part of Black liberation, and asking people to do otherwise would be counterproductive to that.
Thank you for answering the question. And just a couple more questions. And I would like to start off with basically just giving some of the students are at Mount A or even at different schools some advice about just how you got through school and how your journey was navigating the workforce as a student as soon as you graduated university.
You're graduated, right, Noah?
I'm just getting my degree. I'm finishing my degree requirements, thank God.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, during my COVID semester. So navigating the workspace for me has kind of just been like applying for internships, things like that. A dwindling school schedule, and also just trying to build a resume, and trying when to like limit my expectations. Just like straight out the bat, limit my expectations, but also be honest with my skill set and apply to places I think I'll excel. I think those are just the basics. But currently I'm working through an internship at Mount A, actually, the JEA Arts Critics Internship. And that's been amazing. I got to go to the Vancouver Art Gallery and see and get a tour of one of their exhibits, Where Do We Go? It's kind of this reflection on the summer of protests, what it meant, but also a reflection on the Vancouver Art Gallery's collection for the last 90 years. And it features diasporic voices, and it's curated, gets curated by Nia Lewis, a Black artist in Vancouver, so on and so forth. And I remember just being there and being surprised, being confused that there was a space in the Vancouver Art Gallery, like the super neoclassical building, clearly speaking to me, clearly curated to like Black eyes, like my or the eyes of people from my group. And I thought that was really interesting because I never thought I would enter an institution like the Vancouver Art Gallery and see an exhibit catered to me, which is a crazy expectation, I guess. But I just remember being like, wow, this is really interesting. So I think that taught me not to set my expectations, what spaces and what transgression in spaces can look like. Like we can enter whatever space we want, just put yourself there. Yeah.
So currently I'm a recent graduate and I work for the New Brunswick Multicultural Council right now. But I'll be going back to school in the fall. I was supposed to be in school, but then I decided to take a year off because I got a job offer. And I didn't want to do school online. But to answer the question, I think this is a particularly pertinent question to, racialized students and students from low income families, because at the core of, navigating the job market, you have to know certain skills and how networking, like who your connections are, and how networking works and how to make those connections, how to network, because majority of jobs are through networks. So, particularly for low-income students who don't have parents who own corporations or are in hiring positions or know people who can just be like, yeah, my kid is graduating, can you get them a job? And they get a job. Or for racialized students who also don't have these networks, and international students coming here who don't have these networks, it becomes particularly that Black people are more likely to be underemployed. So they'll have the qualification. Oh,
yeah, you cut out.
Yeah, I noticed that, sorry. Black people are more likely to be underemployed. So they'll have the relevant qualifications, but they're less likely to actually get a job that pays or meet those qualifications that they have. And again, one of the major barriers to this is the fact that people don't have access. Low-income students, racialized students, more than likely don't have access to these networks that can, easily get them a job in this field or that field because of who their parents know or someone in their family know. So to answer the question now, I thought it important to intersect that from, an economic and racial perspective. But to get to the heart of the question, it would be, I think, building connections and networking, using your time in university to know people. And I'm not just talking about, fake network or being fake or whatever. That's not what networking is as people characterize it. It can be useful to, get meaningful connections with people, talk to people, your schoolmate, because you don't know who they know. But whatever meetings you get into, you don't know what opportunities these people can expose you to. So asking for business cards, creating your LinkedIn account and adding these people and sending them a message saying, oh, it was great meeting you here. I just thought that I would like to connect with you here on LinkedIn in case, I could learn more, or we can be of mutual benefit to each other or something like that, I think that's at the core, because that's actually how I got my job with the Multicultural Council right now. It's because when I was a student leader, I volunteered with them, and I also I volunteered with them. I did stuff with them, like panels and stuff. And I made those connections. So then when this conversation around anti-racism came up, they knew that I had an interest in anti-racism. So someone actually reached out to me and were like, would you be interested in doing this or taking a year off to doing this? And I was able to leverage that to get this position. So it all comes down to building those networks, especially if you're from low income or racialized background, or a background that doesn't have, you know, strong networks. Then it's important to get to know people, connect with people, and hopefully that will lead, and don't be afraid to reach out to people in your network. You know, when I was a student, I'd reach out to admissions counselors, I'd reach out to anyone that I met throughout the year when I was looking for a summer job. I'd send them a little email and say, you know, hey, like we met here, I'm looking for a summer job opportunity. So if you see anything or hear about anything, because a lot of jobs aren't even posted. My job wasn't posted. So it's about who you know again. So if you hear of anything, please send it my way. I greatly appreciate it. And a lot of opportunities came through email that way. So I think my number one tip would be networking and connecting with your network and seeing how you can leverage that. Other tips would be creating a career plan, reaching out to your career counselor, making sure your resume and cover letter is tailored to the job that you're applying for, et cetera, et cetera. But you can learn that from the employment office. But the most important tip that I'd offer is build your network, because it will definitely come in handy in the future.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for you guys answer the question. There's just one more last question, and it's kind of like one will be directed to Noah and one will be directed to you, Hassani. So basically, the last question is, Noah, you talked about being a Black athlete on Mount Alice and being a football player. And basically, as a Black athlete, how did your relationship, how did you handle a relationship with teammates or people that didn't support you? And Hassani, as a person that just not started advocating for Black lives and everything, but as a person that has been an advocate, you know, advocating for Black lives and everything, how have you gone about with people that didn't really support what you were fighting for?
I guess I'll go first. Only God could judge me, so I'm gone. Either love me or leave me alone. So I mean, man, truly, I feel like you should respect what people say to you, like in all cases, especially when a critique, and take constructive criticism to heart, and build yourself from it. But also have an ability to separate constructive criticism from just straight hate, and constructive criticism from ideologies that are attached to like centuries of atrocities. And I think that it to build a disposition that can pick apart those things. So for me, if as a Black athlete, if you were like a regular student and all you did was really talk bad about football players and you didn't really speak about football players, for me, I would either not pay you any mind, because why would I? I got classes to do. I got school fees to pay. So it's over, you know, all these things, right? Like for me, like outside hate has never been something that is worth paying mind, especially not for most, like I was a low income Black student. So for me, coming in football was something that allowed me to even go to Mount A. Like I never knew like Sackville, New Brunswick was a and two, I was used to vitriol. Like I was used to being a poor kid or someone that's entering spaces that isn't for them, right? So that for me was never something that was going to be a deterrent. And hearing my peers say things like, I remember I had a peer that once said he majors in football. I was in my first year, and being like, all right, like I never have to like, you know what I mean, really like interact with you because you don't care, you don't see me. You know what I mean? Like you'd reduce me to a sport I play. Like I don't have to do this with you. You know what I mean? There's enough people that are willing to do those interactions um, that I don't need to give my energy there. So I think to Black students and Black leaders, what I'd say is your energy, give it to the right people. It's a finite resource. Um, and if someone's just a hater, like, yo, they're just a hater. Like, that's what it is. And I think you have to be honest with yourself about that. Like, surround yourself with people that are supportive, but will give you criticism that is constructive and builds your character, not something that destroys you or is just ridicule, like some things that are adding to your stress. That's not good. Cut that out of your group, take out your scissors, and keep building, keep pushing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was excellent advice, Noah. And I would say something along the same lines of one, and I mentioned this earlier, is having a thick skin, and being able to take criticism and feedback and really inspect it to see, is this valid? Is this person just trying to make me feel bad and make trouble or cause trouble, or are they genuinely like curious about hearing more, or they're just like, they're well-intentioned but in the wrong place? And if the answer is that they are trying to provide some constructive feedback, look into that and see, okay, is there something I could improve? Is this alternative perspective valid to me? And having the humility to kind of adapt that or change. But more than likely in these situations, it's people that just want to be hateful and have an opinion that's rooted in ignorance that they don't know. So for instance, the person that was reached out to me and they were like, you're just perpetuating racism because you're giving bursaries to Black students. Like, that's racism. You're racist and you're a part of the problem, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's someone that obviously just doesn't know even the basic definition of what racism is. And you know what, I wouldn't necessarily advise this, but a lot of times I try to respond to these people because I'm like, they're just coming from a place of misunderstanding. So I try to, provide information. So I did respond to this person and I was like, okay, here's the justification, economic wise, access wise, et cetera, et cetera. And then the person just responded to me again and be like, no, like, I know your group is just about segregation and marginalizing white people and blah, blah, blah. So at that point, I was like, okay, then I am no longer engaging in this conversation. And I think that's the core part. It's being able to say, not take it to heart, and just being able to say, I'm no longer engaging with this, and I won't let this person affect my mood or give them that power over me to affect how I feel about what I'm doing and what I know is right. So just being able to block out the haters and move on, and knowing that where you're coming from with where I'm coming from with what I'm doing, because I know that there's an access barrier, and I want to see more Black folks on university campuses and getting that degree. And that's that's one avenue in which we will achieve racial equality. So I know that, and I know why I was a part of establishing that bursary. And his opinion in that case doesn't really matter, so I can block it out. But it's easier said than done, I know, because at the beginning, when I first got these comments, I literally was losing sleep over it. I was like, everyone hates me, like I'm just causing trouble, like maybe I should just shut up and go back to my corner. But obviously, again, with time and recognizing that some opinions are just like people trying to stir trouble, or they're just ignorant, and blocking out those and pushing forward for what you believe in and what you think is right. So, and there'll always be, recognizing that there will always be difference in opinion. Not everyone will always agree with what's the right thing to do and whatever. So just being open-minded to understand and appreciate what other people are saying, and then making that determination as to whether or not it's something that's rooted in ignorance that you should block out, or something that you can entertain and really wrestle with yourself about.
Thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule and being part of this panel, and giving us this wonderful piece of advice. I've learned a lot over the course over the hour and a half, and man, I can't wait to just keep learning and educating myself and even educating people in my community. And I would like to thank you guys again for stepping out of your schedule and just helping us and helping educate the community. And once again, thank you to you, Noah, Hassani, and Coach Lee. And to the viewers, thank you for attending this panel. And if you have any more questions for the panelists, you could find their social media stuff on the Varsity Project Instagram, and they'll be happy to get back to you and answer any questions you guys have. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here. And yeah, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Me as well. It was nice to be with the Maple League Mounting Society again. Yeah, it was good to take part, and it's good to know that Black History Month is persisting even through this. Okay. Thank you.